It had been decided early in the night that the princess's absence would be treated as a state secret, and that the whole matter would be conspired away as soon as she was recovered. Ignorant to the matter, the garrison was left to their usual war games. They brandished their weapons against one another, and the summer sun glinted off the edge of every polished spear and sword. Layers of clattering weapons echoed across the yard that spilled out before the armory tower. It was not unheard of that Nasu be in the practice field, but his presence there was unusual enough to warrant the soldiers' distraction. Some saluted, understanding his rank over them. Others simply stared, stunned to get a glimpse at the kingdom's most powerful warlock. Nasu could afford none of their frivolity, however, so paid them no mind and marched staunchly past. The cold breezes that tumbled over the walls tugged his garments in every direction and whisked away the sour odor of sweat and manure that soiled the yard. The wind was not powerful enough, however, to whisk out the pollution of burning coals and melted iron emanating from the blacksmith's workshop at the far end of the field. Soot stained the gables and blackened the chimney that protruded through the roof's slate shingles. The eaves were supported by a brick arcade which framed the foundry's glowing furnace. The burning embers' white-hot glow singed off the shadows which doused out the details of the shop's depths. The cuts of wood and clumps of coal that poured out from one of the closets along the back wall were highlighted out of the shadows by the hot orange glow. Blades, with sharpened edges glinting from the firelight, waited patiently along the wall for a hilt to be fixed to their tangs. Over them hung rows of roughly wrought tools, intermittently spaced with the vacancies of those the blacksmith currently employed. The hammer fell with a high-pitched crack to dent a bar of roasted orange iron. Tongs turned the metal block before the hammer again slammed cinders across the shop. The long leather apron which draped from the blacksmith's broad shoulders was singed by the sparks. "Jason!" Nasu hollered before the next strike. The blacksmith looked up. The whites of his eyes contrasted sharply against the black ash painted with sweat across his face. "Lord Nasu, this is a pleasure. How can I help you?" Nasu rolled his wrist and opened his hand, revealing the globe of woven iron. "I need to interrogate a prisoner. Can you busy your apprentices?" Jason's jovial expression drained as he realized Nasu's weighted mood. He rested the hammer against his bench, then moved to the back of the shop where a group of young men, stripped save for their aprons, poured molds and tinkered details with chisels beside the bright fire. A sharp whistle caught their attention, and Jason ordered, "Get to polishing, boys." The gang fumed as they reluctantly abandoned their work for the menial chore of grinding and polishing weapons outside. "They should appreciate the chance to get out of this heat," Jason murmured once they had all left. "So what have we here?" he asked, turning to Nasu. "Jason, I regret that I have to make this confession, but circumstances have left me no other option. What I am about to tell you cannot be shared. Ever. Is that clear?" Jason was practically paralyzed by Nasu's gravity, and it rendered his nod almost invisible. Nasu leaned close to Jason. The salt and sour aroma of sweat, steel, and the leather apron seeped from the blacksmith's body. "Princess Cassandra has been taken, and so far, this is the only lead I have." Nasu rolled the ball into Jason's rough hands. The blacksmith peered through the eyelets at the blue sprite, which shivered and shirked in fear. "By black magic," Jason cursed, "this ferry will be finished." He threw the ball back to Nasu, then stoked the furnace. Nasu's dark eyes reflected the flickering stove as they rolled to focus on the contents of the iron orb. The blue fairy squirmed. It looked at the furnace, then toward Nasu, back at the furnace, and again toward Nasu. The ink in its eyes rippled with looming dread. "Can you smell it?" Nasu teased with a sinister smile. He rolled the artistically crafted prison around in his hand, whirled it around the fairy suspended within. "You will tell me where Cassandra is," Nasu consoled, then unsheathed from the orb the only golden sliver. Nasu smiled at his captive through the hole, then rolled the metal ball in his hand. 2 strips of iron were shifted to fill in the gap, and the diameter of the globe was reduced. Successive strips were unsheathed, replaced by their neighbors, and slowly all of the windows began to constrict around the sprite. The sprite's luminous azure aura began to pulse anxiously at the realization of its diminishing cage. Nasu's silk robes floated down around him as he seated himself violently on the bench beside Jason. The vizier traded a smile with the blacksmith, who pulled from the furnace a crucible of iron brew. The ore poured as a fiery river into a mold. The lava hissed as it flooded the tool's embankment. Nasu teased the fairy ball in the fumes that wafted from the molten pool. The blue fairy frantically twittered and tweeted. The fairy ball was jostled, and the sprite was thrown back and forth against the cage's interior. Nasu then rolled the ball from his palm into the blacksmith's empty crucible. For a moment, there was no distinguishing the floor from the ceiling. Disorientation overwhelmed the sprite. As it gathered its senses, it found itself beside remnant droplets of cooling ore which lined the cup's bottom and seeped a fiery stench. The walls whirled dizzyingly around again, and suddenly the air was replaced with a thick, dark cold. The sprite's periwinkle skin erupted with yellow boils, agitated by the iron dust that floated in the blacksmith's polluted pail of water. Jason pulled the crucible from the bucket, and Nasu plucked the fairy ball out of the pot. "Tell me where Princess Cassandra of Hexen is," Nasu demanded, but did not wait for an answer. He dropped the globe onto the anvil beside the block of molten iron which Jason had freed from the mold. The hammer's smash against the block of ore blasted gusts of hot, sour air over the sprite's open blisters. Black veins seeped beneath the fairy's greening skin. The hammer landed again, and the fairy screeched in the same pitch as fingernails scratched on slate. Nasu lifted the ball from the anvil. "Tell me where Cassandra is." He unsheathed another set of iron cressets and closed the gaps with the remaining strips. The puzzle ball shrank, closing in ever more around the sickly sprite. It hunched awkwardly to avoid the collapsing walls, ceiling, floor. They all looked so much alike. "You will tell me where Cassandra is," Nasu growled, still peeling strips. The sprite's knobbed and gnarled fingers pressed back against the encroaching iron bands. Strands of steam whistled from the fairy's skin as it was branded by the cold, wrought iron cage. It fitfully squealed and attempted to recoil, but found its blistered skin was soldered to the tempered metal. Its inky eyes drained black tears down the contours of its cheeks and chin. "Tell me where Cassandra is," Nasu barked. The sprite's stringy arms quivered as it tried to peel its hands from the iron wall. "Give up," Nasu huffed. "Let go." The greening fairy dropped to hang limply from its adhered palms. Its black tears began to caramelize, to calcify as brown stalactites that dangled from its chin and dripped sticky deposits of resin between its toes. The cramped iron ball was rolled through another column of smoke, teased with the pounded hammer, and again submerged in the bucket of caustic water. As the puzzle ball was dredged from the depths, the fairy struggled to clear its little lungs. The water that dribbled from between its sallow lips drowned its screams, and all it could manage was a broken string of tear-choked coughs. Even its luminous glow had suffocated to a dim, arrhythmic flicker. It was almost as easy to discern the captive by the light of the furnace as it was by the sprite's own glow. "Tell me where Cassandra is." Nasu wove a thread of consoling patience into his demand for surrender. The yellow fairy ducked its gaze and whimpered. The resin that wept from its open ulcers and inky eyes streamed in sticky threads. Tier upon tier the fibrous mucus accumulated, dried thick, and encapsulated the sprite. "Tell me where Cassandra is," the mechanical pattern continued. "Tell me where Cassandra is." The iron strips kept constricting. The veins that once framed the gossamer wings had been burned to their stubby roots. Hunched shoulders blistered as they brushed against the iron bands. The fairy whined through ground teeth, writhed to break free of its consuming tears. "Tell me where Cassandra is." The fairy screamed. "Tell me where Cassandra is." The greening head reared back as its scream faded into a whimper. The black tears drooled in sugary deposits down the back of its neck. The iron still encroached. One band seared the sprite's cheek. The fairy gave one last whimper before its chrysalis of resin was cauterized shut. The moan haunted Nasu and Jason's mind with suggestions that the fairy was too hurt to cry any more. Nasu pulled loose another metal crescent. 3 strips of iron fell to clatter against the pile of which had accumulated on the workshop's floor. The fairy ball had been completely disassembled. In its place, Nasu pinched a pale beige twig, thick and gnarled and skinned of all bark. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger and smiled. Jason nodded approvingly. Cassandra? Terracon was not exactly sure when he had fallen asleep, but was certain it was out of pure exhaustion. Nasu had barraged him with questions well into the night. Slowly, brown lashes peeled back the lids from his cinnamon eyes, and he greeted the sunny early afternoon with a groggy sigh. He did not regret the sleep. It was better to be rested than to collapse from exhaustion just as some crucial clue would call him to arms. Unfortunately, it had not been restful. His waking thought was the same one which had seen him asleep, and as a result, the night seemed to have passed in a single blink. Duty eventually overwhelmed his drowsiness, and Terracon drew himself out of bed. He threw off the quilt and stretched as he stood. He slipped into a long-sleeved tunic stained a stormy shade of blue. He slid on a pair of leather slacks, bruised from years of faithful service to be as soft as a baby's kiss. He stomped into a pair of polished leather boots. The matching belt was clasped shut as he walked out of the room. Nasu's warning not to alert anyone to the previous night's incident echoed in Terracon's mind as he passed the soldiers who spotted the hallways. They had not shared in his luxury of being excused from the morning's regular duties. Red veins scratched their eyes. Their lids were swollen heavy with sleep. So that is how he had looked the previous morning. Terracon walked through the colonnade and was rhythmically eclipsed by the columns' spaced shadows. He entered a wing of courtrooms and passed through a door to a lushly decorated parlor where Her Majesty regularly recessed. Osmara was seated, legs crossed, on an ebony throne. Her head was swathed in an iridescent green wimple, and the black silk of her long off-the-shoulder gown wept over her contours like viscous shadows. "What perfect timing, my boy," she said with arms open to embrace him. She kept Terracon for what seemed a moment too long with a surprisingly tight hold, but he did not dare return the pressure. She was too delicate to withstand his pythonic embrace. Her soft, wrinkled hands, exhausted from the embrace, slid down to take his. "Nasu has found something." Osmara returned her gaze to the vizier. "Please, Nasu, do go on." The vizier seemed offended to no longer be engaged in private conversation, as he fixed his posture to its usual pompous rigidity before continuing. "While investigating the captain's claims, this was discovered in Her Highness's room." He held up the thick, gnarled twig, skinned of all bark. Osmara's eyes flooded with interest, and she leaned forward to better examine the evidence. "It is from a species of tree native to Escambreco, not uncommon, but normally found only in the north. Accompanied with a trail of soil, I believe that this fairy infiltrated Cassandra's bedroom and tampered with something, resulting in the princess's disappearance. Why this roundabout method to incapacitate the House of Hexen is being employed, I could not say, but I believe it to mean that Princess Cassandra is alive, and I am confident that she is somewhere on the northern peninsula." Osmara slowly reclined into her seat. Her lacquered nails raked the carved armrests. There was a stirring inside of her, a sort of tectonic shift of opinion or eruption of mood that struggled against her majestic composure. The insight which once sparkled in her eyes was drowned in a deluge of impetus. "Then we go north," she growled. "Mother," Draco tested, "I know that this is dire, but I think this evidence is too circumstantial. North is a heading, not a location." Osmara calmly turned to Draco. "If this is all there is, Draco, then that is all we have." Her voice cracked. "And it will have to do, because she needs to come back alive. I will have my daughter again." Draco's violet eyes darted between Nasu and Terracon before he submitted. "Draco," Osmara curled her fingers to command his approach, took his hand in hers, and continued, "Gather a squad of knights, the brightest and most skilled of the orders. Head out this evening across the Vorsan Desert. You know what sort of provisions you will need for your journey. I will have word sent to every fortress between here and the North Peninsula that you are to be accommodated in every way. Scour every cave and cranny. Leave no leaf unturned. Obliterate any and every obstacle. Raise every barrier. Whatever aspect is responsible will wail in regret after it is served the pity of the witches, whose sovereign rule it so arrogantly dared to undermine. Draco bowed his brow to her knuckle. As you will it, mother. The prince stood, and Nesu approached. I will help you prepare. Prepare for yourself, Nesu, her majesty barked. You will escort his highness in retrieving the crown princess. The sudden verbal assault caught the vizier off guard. He turned a riddled, wrenched glance at the queen. But Osmara, for your sake I could better serve here. Tarakan could conceive of no relationship in which Nesu would be granted the lax audacity to refer to her majesty by her first name alone. Osmara paid no mind, however, too preoccupied with the audacity of the vizier's double-guessing. I am not served by your doubts, Hierophant. Neither is my daughter, nor the sovereignty of this nation. Without her, there is no right and no rule. Atheistic doubt will rend asunder the civility and peace my mothers have forced on the people. If the fairies accomplish their end, it will not be an end to a dynasty, but abolish the divine authority of the curse. The people will rise to end this reign, and who then will you be left to serve? She gave him a chance to follow his folly, and continued only after his silence had adequately announced his submission. You serve no use at my side, wiping away my tears with the same artistry as my sleeve. I need you to go where I cannot go. You have insights more valuable to my knights than to me. The queen and vizier exchanged stares until they reconciled over a mutual understanding. Yes, your majesty, I shall prepare immediately. Something broken, almost human, poisoned his surrender. He retreated from the parlor. Draco, take Tarakan with you, Osmara attached. Draco's gaze darted to the captain. Mother, please don't spread yourself so thin. I cannot take Tarakan if both Nesu and I are gone. You will need the captain at your side. Osmara turned to Tarakan. You will be in the extrication squad, Captain Tarakan. Do not worry about me. I am nothing without my daughter, and I know that you understand her importance to our lives. Osmara stood and moved to the door. I shall be taking tea. Black magic keep you both. The clicking of her gilded heels faded down the exterior hall, abandoning the prince and the captain to each other's company. Draco stared expectantly from under his curtain of auburn hair, but Tarakan had no answer for him, and shrugged innocently. Draco left the room with an inviting nod, and Tarakan followed. So, Captain, any suggestions for the draft? I've always been a fan of Sergeant Darrell, Tarakan said. Karen, Ramu, Dion, Shem, Karsak. Not Karsak, Tarakan had almost shouted. His disposition is more trouble than his skills are worth. All right. I'll get everyone assembled. Meet me in the war room 2 hours before sundown, Draco said, then jogged down a tangent hallway. Melanie, I'm taking Ramses, Tarakan shouted as he barged into the stables. He had a notion that the princess's prize courser might prove useful in locating Cassandra, and would be more invested in keeping her safe during a quick escape. The stable girl peeked out from around a wall. Her face was twisted into a frightening grimace, largely the result of her work. Her cheeks were reared back from a toothy grin in which she clamped a leather strap with which she worked. What are you talking about? She said as soon as she spat out the hide. What if Cassandra needs him? You know I cannot let you just take off with one of her unicorns. He paused as he took the stall's handle and responded, She will not mind in this case, then pulled open the door to reveal the large, sable steed. What is going on? Why do you need him at this hour? Why not take one of your regular... A fit of disapproving neighs erupted from the stall. Ramses reared to flurry his iron-shoed hooves. Tarakan ducked and fell back, and only narrowly escaped being clobbered. Melanie threw herself between them, arms outstretched in an attempt to herd the unicorn's composure. Ramses immediately abandoned his offense and retreated into the depths of the stall in a fit of whinnies, snorts, and insulted stomping. Melanie cautiously crept in after Ramses, signaling Tarakan to stand his ground. She cooed the beast and rubbed the thick neck muscles beneath his shimmering black coat. You must be insane, Captain. He is a prize in the royal stable, not just some random courser. She turned to scold him further, but her timbre changed suddenly when she noticed his black dress armor inlaid with silver scrollwork. By black magic, why are you all dressed up? Terracon slowly moved into the stall, holding a lace-trimmed square of fabric defensively before him. His gaze remained averted as he slipped the handkerchief beneath Ramsay's flared nostrils. Calm down, boy. Yes, you know it. It is Cassandra's. He traded the kerchief with his hand and back again. His fingers found their way into the wiry black hairs, and slowly he began to pet the animal. The others will be here shortly, Melanie, he said while trying to establish eye contact with Ramses, so you might want to get started with the saddles. Others? What in the demon's desert are you talking about? It was absolutely uncanny that Terracon should be there before Melanie had heard there had been a call to mount, and the discomfort of having been left out of the know, tempered by Terracon's demands, made Melanie's frustration apparent in her voice. There is an assignment to escort Prince Draco and the Hierophant to the north of Escambreco. Nothing for you to worry about, and even less worth chatting about to every passing scullery boy and laundress. Terracon's sarcasm did little to disguise the mission's obvious significance, and his presumptuous insults shattered Melanie's patience. What do you take me for, Terracon? Some dolt? The Lord Vizier does not ride unless the Queen rides. As for my chatting with scullery boys and laundresses, I think I can judge for myself whether or not a topic is interesting enough. Having defended herself, and on the verge of begging for gossip, her tone sweetened. Besides, if it really was not worth chatting about, then there would be no point in keeping it a secret. It's not a secret, Melanie. I just told you. I am to escort Nesu and the prince. How many saddles? 9, not counting Ramses, Terracon answered. Melanie bit her lower lip and stared at her feet contemplatively for a moment, then retorted, You and 7 other people are going to escort the Lord Vizier and First Prince? Terracon, that is not a very convincing story. Now I know that you get to spend all of that time in court. Surely you must have picked up on something that you can share. You know, you're right. There is something I can share, Terracon added smilingly. Those 9 coursers will need armor and comparisons, so you might want to get started. Melanie's attempt at a smile withered. Right. Defeat tainted her tone. She turned out of the stall, but stopped at the door. Why do you always have to be so temperamental? Because you are always prying into others' affairs. How would you like it if some utterly untrustworthy person barraged you with intimate questions? Silence occupied the stable's sour air between them for a moment while Melanie took time to consider her answer. Hey, at least somebody would be going out of their way to take a genuine interest in my life. Her response illuminated some doubt lurking deep in the shadow of Terracon's psyche, but his reasoning was not quick enough to grasp onto the idea. He glanced up at her, but she had already turned away, too busy to be interrupted.